Good morning. It's May 9th today, and we are in First Samuel chapters 5 through 7 in our Old Testament reading today. And I think a very vivid story where we have the ark captured by the Philistines in the previous passage. And now they take it into their own temple, the temple of Dagon in Ashdod. And we know the story of what happens there. The idol falls over and on his face before the ark, and then the next night they set him back up, and he falls down, and his head and his hands are removed from him. And there's a great deal of fear and awe that the Philistines have about the God who is working through this magic box that they have in their midst here, a little bit differently than the Israelites had been treating the Ark of the Covenant before that, and so they don't know what to do with it. So they say, well, let's move it on to Gath, which of course is the city that Goliath is from, and kind of a capital city for the Philistines as well. And there, the same thing happens. They're heavily oppressed by the Lord. It says his hand is heavy on them. And so they try to figure out what to do with it and eventually send it on, and it ends up at Beit Shemesh. And the people of Beit Shemesh look into the ark again, Beit Shemesh being in Israelite territory now. And they look into the ark, and 70 of them die because of the having looked into the ark, and they don't know how to treat this as well. They don't know who they are interacting with when they interact with this box and with God. And so eventually it ends up then at Kiriath Jearim, and Samuel comes back onto the scene eventually here as well. And I think it's interesting that eventually they cry out to Samuel and they say, do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines. And I think it kind of reflects a misunderstanding that the people have about who God is and what relationship he desires to have with them. He wants to have a personal interaction with each one of them, and yet they are trying to make Samuel their go-between themselves and God, and they are keeping God at a distance, uh, forcing him away from them in some measure. And I think that's a little bit of what happens in John chapter 6 as well, with the miracles that are happening there and the feeding of the 5,000. And eventually Jesus is going to get into a boat and cross over. The disciples are going to get into the boat and cross over, and Jesus is going to come to them walking on the water. And they're afraid of him. They don't know what to do with him either. There's I think, a bit of a parallel between these two things of man's interaction with God. They know that he is holy, that they know that they are sinful, and they want to be removed from him, and yet they also want his power and his gifts working for them, and want to be able to manipulate him and use them in their own terms. And I think it is clear that Jesus is compassionate for people, feeding thousands of them, and compassionate for his disciples who are afraid when they see him approaching the boat, and yet also it shows his awesome majesty, and his willingness to condescend to people and to meet them where they are, but not to leave them in an unholy state. That unholiness is going to have some consequences. It needs repentance. It needs turning back to him. And so that's what's being shown, I think, in these two passages, at least from what we have for today.